I wanted to take a minute and introduce you to the Ontario Steam Heritage Museum video. This video is about an hour and a half long, and what we're going to do is break it down into several smaller ones because the topic is so big. We went and spent a half a day there. Very interesting place. You should try to go and see it. If you contact them, they'll do private tours or whatever. And they also have public days when they fire up a bunch of steam engines. Very great place to go. Check them out on their website, Ontario Steam Heritage Museum. Wayne Fischer, very knowledgeable, and he spent the half a day with us, told us all about it, and we're going to break this into small videos, and that's going to be something for my editing team to do. It'll be a challenge. I'm here right now doing that, so anyway, thanks for watching. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I'm down here today at something very unusual for my channel anyway. I'm here at Limestone Farms, and we're going to have a bit of a tour here, and we'll show you what all goes on at this place. And they have an open house here in the summertime, and it would be a good time to come down and see for yourself. But we're going to go in and see what's happening here.
So welcome to the Ontario Steam Heritage Museum, and as you can see from here, the array of tools you need in order to be able to work on this equipment. You need everything from a dental pick to a 4-foot pipe wrench and everything in between. Part of the mandate of the museum is that we restore this equipment and to running order, and then we ship it out to shows, and of course part of it is the education of the public as to the importance of what steam is to our society. Because you have to remember that the first, they drove the last spike to join Halifax to Vancouver in November of 1885. That was 4 years before the internal combustion engine was invented, and 10 years before Rudolph Diesel invented the diesel engine, which replaced the locomotive and replaced all the construction equipment, and is all powered by diesel now. So one of the first examples of a steam traction engine, and you notice we call it a steam traction engine, we don't call it a steam tractor, because the steam traction engine name was given to it in the 1860s to separate the portables from which were pulled out into the field with a horse and hooked up with a leather belt to the thrashing machines, to separate that from these things called a traction engine, which you could drive out, and you could also use it for plowing and so on. But in order for this technology to be developed in the 1860s, there were three things that had to be invented. The first one was the differential gear. The second thing was the clutch. The clutch wasn't invented for the automobile. The clutch was invented for this 30 years before the automobile. And the next thing was the steering gear. So by the time you got to the 1890s, when the first cars were coming out, this was a mature product and had already been on the market for 30 years. So this is one of my favorite ones. My wife calls it an ugly one, but this is a 1912 Nichols and Shepard, and it's a Western plowing engine rated at 85 horsepower. And with this engine, the bigger engines were used out on the prairies. This particular one is anywhere from 65 to 85 horsepower. You can draw an 8-furrow drag plow, and it was the 8-furrow drag plow, and we've got a John Deere 1912 8-furrow drag plow. It was the 8-furrow plow which opened up 90% of the Canadian prairies and the American prairies. And just like today, steam traction engines came in different horsepower classifications. So 65 to 85 horsepower would pull an 8-furrow plow, 110 horsepower, and with with the 8-furrow plow, in 10 hours you plow 25 to 30 acres in a day. A big step up from the 1 acre in a day which a horse or an ox will plow. So that was a 25 to 30-fold increase in productivity. And then the next classification, 110 horsepowers, they would pull a 14-bottom plow. 14-bottom plow, you could plow in a day, depending on how heavy the soil was, 50 to 60 acres in 10 hours. But back in the olden days, just like today, the farmer didn't stop working after 10 hours. He worked until the sun went down. And the Case Company wasn't happy with that, so they built a 110 horsepower, or sorry, 150 horsepower steam traction engine. That steam traction engine would pull a 52 bottom plow, and it would plow 160 acres in 10 hours and in 4 days a square mile. And they were used out on the sugar beet plantations out in Minnesotas and all that, where the land was nice and flat. Because back then we didn't get our sugar from sugar cane in the Caribbean, we got our sugar from sugar beets. And so these engines were very important from taking us from the horse and the ox to what developed into the tractor from these. So this one is 85 horsepower. It's a double cylinder one, and it was a Western plowing engine, and I purchased this out in Manitoba and brought it back here, and we did a little bit of boiler work on it, and it's my favorite engine.
What would it weigh?
This would weigh about watered up somewhere in the neighborhood of about 19,000 pounds, so close to 10 tons. And as I said, this is a typical size Western engine, of which 90% of the Western engines were in that horsepower classification. So now we can go along and see some of the other traction engines down here. This is a 19 Sawyer Massey, built in Hamilton, Ontario. The Sawyer Massey company was the largest manufacturer in Canada of steam traction engines, and at the peak of production in 1912 they were building 3 of these every day. And this wasn't purchased by a farmer, this was purchased by the Ontario government in 1921. The farmers got control of the Ontario government and decided that they're going to build their own roads, not have a contractor do it. So they purchased this engine. I've got a picture of this engine in Rockwood, where they were building Highway 8 from Dundas to Galt, which is now Cambridge. And there's a picture of this in that down in Rockton, being used to pull a road grader. So the Sawyer Massey company made all the equipment for the farmers, they made all the equipment for the road builders, and of course railway contractors would use traction engines as well. Next one we've got is a 1913 Sawyer Massey. This one, by the way, is rated at 68 horsepower. And again, it's got the Western saddle tanks on the side. This came from Saskatchewan, and it was a plowing engine in Saskatchewan. And of course, not only was it a plowing engine, they ran the big separators out in Western Canada. And if their mothers aren't watching, I can get 5 grandkids on the service platform up there. So this is what opened up the Canadian prairies and the American prairies, and as they claim that North America became the breadbasket to the world, and it's because of this equipment that happened. Because when you got those big fields out there with a horse or an ox, you have to appreciate that in Ontario, that if you had a 30-acre field, that was 30 days of plowing, and you hadn't even done anything yet. That's why they had to have lots of kids back then,
Yeah.
lots of boys to help out.
And lots of horses.
And lots of horses, yeah. This is a 1915 Sawyer Massey steam traction engine, and you'll notice it doesn't have my name on it. It's got my wife's name on it because they gave her that as a wedding present. And as she said, nothing says I love you like a steam traction engine. And she's a certified operator as well, and so is my daughter that can run this. So this is our high mileage engine, and we've got rubber wheels on it so we can go in lots of parades and all that sort of thing and take it to shows and not tear up the asphalt. And this has got an all welded boiler on it. A lot of the engines today, over half of the traction engines we've got in here have been reboilered because there's not too many boilers are of any value after 100 years. Because they were pretty brutal with how they ran these things back in the olden days. A couple of other neat items I've got here on this table over here. We've got what we call an educator. This came out of the Stratford shops, and it taught the engineers how to service the Walshard valve gear on the locomotives, and you can crank this around, and it shows like the white is the steam going in and the yellow is the exhaust, and you can go from forward to reverse, so it taught the mechanics how it works. Another neat item here is this Clark steam engine that came out of a Clark steam car. Now, the amazing thing was, by the time you got to 1900, there were more steam cars on the road than there were gasoline and electric vehicles on the road. The reason for that was steam was a mature product, and in the United States, there was 125 companies that manufactured steam cars. And why? Because it was a mature product. They understood the steam engine, where not too many people understood the gas engine or the internal combustion engine, or as my father used to call it when the lawnmower wouldn't start, the infernal combustion engine. So that's typical. Most of the steam cars had an engine like that, and there'd be a gear on here that drove a chain drive down to the differential gear on the back end of the vehicle. And so that's typical. And of course the Stanley steam car, which a lot of people are aware of, held the land speed record for 5 years between 1907 and 1914, and they achieved a speed of 130 miles an hour back in 1914 in Florida along the beach with a Stanley steamer. So you can see on here we've got patterns on the wall and all that, because we can make our own parts here. The thing with a steam traction engine was they only had 4 things to work with. Welding hadn't been developed yet. So you could roll steel and rivet it. You could make a pattern and cast it as those patterns on the wall and machine it. The next thing you could do is you could bolt it together, and the last thing you could do is you could roll the tubes in so that you could have to replace the tubes because they were the one item that wore out in the boiler. So they only had those 4 things to work with. So as a result, today we can keep this equipment running because we can go to foundries, and if you tell a foundry, oh, this is for a 120-year-old machine, they give you a good price on it, you see. Whereas think of the antique car collectors, and any car after 25 years old is classed as an antique. And if you buy a 1990 Chevrolet or something like that, and if the little computer that controls the firing craps out, you can be the best mechanic in the world, you're not going to make it run. We can make all the parts, and we can make this equipment run. So we can, and with the new welded boilers on it and how we look after them, those boilers will remain in perpetuity. We hope. And you can see we inflate a lot. We put on a course out here to allow a person to get their certificate qualification to run this. We're the only organization that TSSA has licensed to put on that course, and if we put on the course and they pass our exam, which has got to be tougher than their exam, they knocked 40 hours off the apprenticeship time. But we got all, so as a result, people take our course and they run out and they buy a traction engine and we allow them to bring it out here. But we got all the bits and pieces to service this sort of thing, eh? Like oilers and all that, packing and all that sort of stuff you don't normally find anywhere else around. So we've got the expertise and the equipment to allow people that when they get a traction engine to be able to service it and rebuild it and put it into service.
How many places like this is there in Canada? Is this a one of a kind, or?
Yeah, it is a one of a kind, and it's probably one of a kind in North America, because you've got a lot of museums that it's been started by an individual, and then when he gets old, he turns it over to the government, and then you get a bunch of bureaucrats in there, and at the end of the day, they don't do anything. Like, we do more in this museum than any other museum in Canada. We've overhauled probably close to 10 steam traction engines. We're working on a locomotive now, and whereas you get these big, like the Western Development Museum and the Reynolds Museum out in Alberta, they don't overhaul any engines or anything.
Yeah, this is more than a museum. Like, it's a working shop. Like,
Exactly, and that's why it's a little bit cluttered, and you see lots of tools and stuff laying all over the place. That's because we're doing something out here. We're not just putting it on display.
yeah, what they'll do is they'll paint it up pretty, and
Exactly.
put it behind a glass, and there
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sits and rusts.
Exactly, and the boilers won't even hold water, and yeah, they look pretty, but that's not the way they work. And this gives you a good idea what we're really doing out here.
Yeah, talking about buying steam engines.
And that's that's our steamboat that we had. We had that out up in the Muskokas, and now we got it on the Grand River down here. There's a picture of our John Deere 8-furrow drag plow that we plow with. And up above you'll see a number of smoke box doors. And those smoke box doors is the peak of production for traction engines was 1912, and then by the time you got to the end of the First World War, the gasoline engine became reliable and they started cranking out lots of tractors, so these were phased out of operation. And when the Second World War came along and we needed the steel for munitions, what they did, the farmers, all you had to do is drive out 2 pins and you could save your smoke box door, and then
Everything else
tow it
went.
off. Everything else went to be scrapped, to be melted down for munitions, yeah. And of course in Europe, everything was confiscated and melted down, so in Europe they don't have steam traction engines. They're coming to North America to buy that.
And take 'em home.
Yeah, because like in the States, the Americans like their Case steam traction engines. Canadians, we like our Sawyer Masseys. You go to England, they got the Fowlers and the Marshalls. You go to mainland Europe, they got nothing because it was all confiscated and melted down. So they're just thankful to have anything. So they come to North America and they bid against us and they take it back over there, and so we'll never see it again. So this is our main workshop. We've got an overhead crane for lifting stuff, and we'll go down here. We got engine lathes and model making lathes and milling machines and all that sort of stuff to make the repairs. So now we're going to call on our chief engineer, Richard Mosier, and he's going to give us a little story about the challenges he had in repairing our 1909 Vulcan locomotive. So take it away, Richard.